Well, good afternoon, good day, everybody. It's Jack Raymond, John Pedersen, when we're back with another episode of We Talk Photo. I think I say this every time. I know we're up over 110 now, maybe
Yeah,
something like that.
125.
Are we that
Yep.
much? Wow, time
Yeah, we're
flies when
doing
you're having
good.
fun. Anyhow, thank you all for taking some time to be here. Those of you that are listening on the podcast, and those of you who are viewing on YouTube, thank you for taking some time to be here. Anyhow, today we have another a special guest that um, again, it's been too long. Michael Gordon's been on with us a few times prior. We mentioned Michael in our last podcast that we did with Guy and Colleen about their books. Michael has a new book out that we're going to talk about. Michael, thank you for being here from Southern California. Michael Gordon. Those of you who don't know Michael, you need to know who Michael is.
Mhm.
Um, Michael, do we need to? I mean, should we just go through a little bit for those of you who don't know you? Um,
I think I'm kind of unknown, so sure, if you want.
Sure, go for it,
well, I
Michael.
wouldn't
Go
say
for it.
that.
I'm a landscape photographer from Southern California. I work full time in this. The desert is my niche. I think that's what I'm best known for, my black and white desert work, largely from the Mojave Desert, but I span all the deserts in North America. They're all of great interest to me. And I've been a photographer now for 35
Mhm.
plus years. I've been teaching workshops for 20 something, and it's my photography is my everyday life. And I feel incredibly blessed to still be doing this despite all the changes in the industry over the years. I'm very
Mi-
fortunate to
Michael's
be
one of the
doing this.
people, John, that I'm, when I have the pleasure of knowing Michael, and he and I and Guy and a bunch of other crazy people used to camp out quite a bit and sit around talking. And boy, I learned so much from people like Michael, Guy, and
Oh
over the
yeah.
years. And
Well,
it's
I was just thinking,
great.
Michael, as you were giving the introduction, I've had the pleasure of knowing Guy and spending time with him, but out in the field. But if I had to pick one workshop that I wanted to do myself, it would be with you, black and
Oh,
white
well,
in the desert, because your vision and your style is so distinctive and so beautiful that
And there's one
I know I
spot
could learn
left, John.
something.
One
Say again?
spot left. There's one spot
One
left. We're going to
spot
get to
left.
that
I
later.
know.
Has your name
well,
on
thank you, John. I
it.
really appreciate
Yeah,
that.
it's
Thank you
your
very
work is
much.
phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. I
John,
do
Michael
appreciate that.
knows the history of every rock in that place.
Well,
And the people that I've known have been with Michael on that. Some of our people have been with Michael on that.
hmm
And they all come back. You know what I mean, Michael gets to places that, he's not going to spend 4 mornings at Zabriskie Point. He knows the nooks and crannies there like crazy. So, but we'll get to that
Yeah,
later. Michael, thank you for being
yeah.
here.
Thank you, guys. It's great to be with you again.
So let's jump right to the big news then, Michael. You have a new book come. Is it out
Yeah,
already or is it coming out?
it it is now available. It's there. It is. It is now available. I've yet to announce it to my mailing list because I've just had too many things on the plate and I didn't want to tie myself down shipping. But I announced it to social media and I'm still busy shipping books every day. But
Wonderful.
eventually, it'll my mailing list will find out about it. This is my fourth book of its kind. They're all 8 by 8 inches in size. This book has more photos than any of my previous three, and it also is more text rich, including uh, a forward by Gaital and captions on every photograph. And whether or not captions, I've got quotes from favorite artists and writers and so forth. And yeah, and Jack, before we started recording, you said, how much effort these books can require. In all honesty, I started working on this book last autumn, and I really wanted to have it ready to go with my exhibit that hung in February, but I just couldn't get the book done. And I thought, okay, it'll be March. But then March came, April came, May came, and then I asked Guy if he'd do some proofreading for me, and Then we started to uncover some things that needed to be improved. So it delayed the book another few weeks, but I'm really thrilled with the book. I think it looks really elegant. It really is a product of my soul and my effort of more than 25 years of photography. I think the oldest photo might be the one on the cover. It's more than 20 years of age. So
It is all of the above.
yeah,
I read it last night and enjoyed
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Michael,
I
you
read it.
won't tell people this, but you just said you had your images in an exhibition at many
yeah.
exhibitions. Just give the folks a little bit idea where your stuff has been. It's pretty impressive.
Um, so the exhibit that I did in February was a two-man show with Chuck Kimmerly, the great Chuck Kimmerly. You guys have had Chuck on We Talk,
Yes, we
right?
We
have.
Yeah.
have. Yeah.
So Chuck and actually, here's an interesting story. Uh, I encouraged Chuck to also submit to the Viewpoint Gallery for their open call for the exhibition period, fully realizing that he could actually bump me out of being selected for an exhibition. But Chuck's my friend. I really admire Chuck's work. And so I felt he really should try and get his work in there. So I told Chuck, hey, you ought to submit your work. So we both submitted, and lo and behold, we get an email the same day. You're going to be showing with Chuck. You're going to be showing with
Oh,
Michael. And we didn't tell them, we didn't plan it. They didn't know we knew each
Isn't
other.
that great?
But yeah, it ended up being a really nice exhibit. I think we had 50 to 60 prints in total. Half of the gallery was Chuck's, and then half of the gallery was mine. It was really beautiful. Um, and that was sort of my first release of this Denizens work to the world, even though it had been on the website. And I've been quietly doing it all along, but it was the first time that I packaged it in a way for audiences to see. And then the book followed, and then the printed folio, which I'm sure we will get to.
so just
Yeah.
jumping back a little bit. So folks, we forgot to mention this when Michael first started talking about the book. It's called Denizens, which I loved
Yeah.
your definition of that word denizen, which is an animal, plant, or person that lives in or is often in a particular place. And
Mhm.
so this book really focuses on denizens of the desert. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. And I actually previously I called this body of work by a different name, quoting a early writer on the California desert, but the name was um, a little off-putting. And so I was hunting, and then I thought of denizens, and I thought that's just absolutely perfect because,
It's a
we don't
great
use
word.
that word very often. And to me, those plants are absolutely very particular denizens of very particular place. They can't live anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so that was the motivation.
And that's one of the
Yeah.
things, like through this book, a lot of the images are not just landscape images or nature images or images about the foliage that's in the desert. And that's
Yeah.
something that people don't often think about, right? You think the desert, it's the sand dunes, but you really focus
Yeah.
on a lot of the plant life that comes through this desert.
Yeah, absolutely. I consider myself a landscape photographer, but I don't think anybody really knows what that means, because most of us who point a camera at the landscape have lots of other elements in there.
Yeah.
But I think for me, this has been digesting my own work and my own habitats over the course of 20 something years. And what I really sought to do was to sort of break down my own work and say what is inside the frame that really is what is most appealing to me here. And I'm a fairly avid gardener, and I grew up as a conscripted gardener. I had to slave around the house for my parents, like maybe many young people did in that era. So I learned to work with plants and do gardening at a young age. And I think that's where this love for plants came from, because I sometimes wonder, why do I obsessively chase after plants, especially plants that maybe a lot of people don't care about, don't know about, don't have any interest in. But once I started to have this idea about this body of work that I wanted to create, it was self-perpetuating. I had to keep doing it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
I
for
won't
sure.
stop. Yeah.
I mean, there's great stories in the book about each image, along with botanical information, which I find informative myself. I'm not a
Yeah.
botanist by any means, but the foliage in the desert is so different from what I'm used to seeing, and
Yeah.
so I have a lot
Yeah.
to learn myself. So I've
Yeah.
thoroughly enjoyed going through this book.
Yeah. Here's a couple interesting facts. So the desert, California desert, occupies about nearly 30% of the state. Um, I've forgotten how many species of plants we have in this state, but nearly 25% of desert plants are endemic, meaning they're only found in that particular location or in the state of California or, in the Mojave Desert somewhere. So there's this great level of endemism. And then beyond that, California, most people wouldn't think this because we house so many people, but California is the most biodiverse state in the nation. And that surpasses bristlecone pines, giant redwoods, and all the things that people think about when they think about plants. To me, that also includes all of these fascinating plants that are across the desert. And the truth is, if it were really a barren desert, which that doesn't exist in very many places, maybe it wouldn't have the same sort of appeal to me. Part of what appeals to me, or a large part of what appeals to me, is the fact that the irony itself, the desert is considered a wasteland where people don't want to go, where things can't live. And the opposite is exactly true. It's a place thriving with life that is hyper adapted to the place it lives, both plants and animals. And so those are the things that motivated the work, that these plants are very special plants. They occupy a very special niche. And those are things that, like you pointed out, John, that's what I try to elaborate through the captions, because that's what really draws me too. So for me, it's a package. It's not just making a photograph. I wouldn't have that interest in making the photograph if I didn't care about the plants to the degree that I do. So it's just an all-encompassing package for me.
John, Michael, this is not, our podcasts are not gear driven, but I
Mhm.
know that some folks are going to would be interested to know that, you do use a camera like a lot of us do, but you also use a big camera, or a big boy camera, if you want to call it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what you use to make some of these photographs.
I will. I apologize. I forgot we're online, and I hope my ice crunching didn't come through.
Oh, no, great.
um, yeah, I use a 4x5 inch view camera, and I use a Nikon DSLR. And I'm glad your podcast is not gear driven, because I really don't have a lot to say about gear. They're tools. They help me achieve what's up here. So, I need the camera to match what's going on up here. The 4x5 inch view camera. And in fact, I did not become a digital photographer until 2008. 2008 was the first time I acquired a digital camera. Before then, I was shooting strictly 4x5 inch sheet film, not street film. Before that, I was medium format, and then I started with a 35mm film camera, like many of us did that are old enough. There's no denying how awesome high resolution cameras are, like the Nikon D850, which is the one I use. But as you can see in my images, I'm after a particular aesthetic. And my problem generally with digital sensors and modern lenses is they make everything crispy and brittle. And if you really want that sharp aesthetic, that's great, and I like it a lot of the time. But you notice how my plants, they tend to be very limited focus, very shallow. Some things are in focus, some things are out of focus. A lot of that is either done with the view camera or with specialized lenses. In particular, I really like a lens which is called a Petzval lens, and Petzval is a very particular design that's more than 100 years of age. It's a portrait lens, so basically the center of the image is the sharpest, and it gets really soft going to the edges. And what I'm trying to do with my photographs is not give clinical depictions of plants. I'm trying to create an artful image. And so I don't really care. And in fact, coming from the West Coast F64 aesthetic, as it's generally known, all these photographers that worked with view cameras to get everything critically sharp, when I got there, I got bored by it. It's like, well, this is kind of easy to do too. Well, what else can I do with this really cool view camera that has all of these possibilities with movements of the standards? And that's when I started to play with throwing things out of focus and with using vintage lenses to get particular aesthetics. And what I really had to do was um, to take my blinders off and cut my ties to my past, because if I was trying, I had to get through the warts of the old aesthetic, which is unsharp in certain places, sharp in certain places, and a lot of photographers that would bug them. Eventually, that became kind of a hallmark of the way my images look. And in fact, I've really tried to push this as far as I can. I try to sometimes have as little in focus in the frame as I can. It's almost like a test of other photographers. How much could I engage them having so little in actual focus? And I'm sometimes shocked at how receptive people are to photographs that they're not accustomed to seeing that way, because typically the sharp aesthetic is what people want.
It is, but those areas of focus and out of focus are wonderful tools for us as artists to direct people's eyes to where we want them to look and disregard things that we don't. I mean,
Absolutely.
when we're in the field, our brain filters out all of these other things, but with photographs, everything's presented there. And so it's up to us as the artist to try to help people filter things out. And we do that with focus.
Yeah. Yeah. An ironic thing is I think of this term depth of field, right, which is a photography term. The more depth of field we have, the sharper things become, right, from near to far, and with the premise that this will enhance the feeling of depth. To my way of thinking, it's the exact opposite. Because everything is so sharp from near to far, I see a loss of depth. And when I look at my photographs, which are very shallow focus, to me, they have more depth to them because I can see clear planes of separation through the frame. And as a side note too, one of the things, and you guys may remember in forums and stuff, there was this period, maybe it's still a thing, when a lot of photographers, and it used to come up on Petapixel a lot, bokeh, right? How people were chasing bokeh, which for those who don't know, it's spelled Bokeh. And that's the way things present that are out of focus. And I've always been in love with bokeh and silver grain and the way they represent themselves in a print. And so part of the challenge of my images is not just making things look beautiful in focus, but I want the out of focus parts to look as beautiful as the rest of the frame. And that's something that's really hard to pull off sometimes. Sometimes it's the out of focus bits are too distracting or can be too distracting. So it can be a real challenge to put together an image where you have a very limited amount of focus and everything works in concert to make this cohesive whole.
I mean, you have to watch your backgrounds, whether it's in focus or out of focus, to your point. I mean, they're critically important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
I wanted to talk real quick, Michael. For those that are on YouTube, I want you to look at the image behind Michael. And for those that are listening to our podcast, he's got a beautiful black and white image of the sand dunes with really beautiful highlights and beautiful shadows. And it seems like light is, it reminds me a lot of photographing the Palouse, very similar, just sort of shapes and form, and where light is the primary subject.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm not the first person to say this, but of course we know what photography means, writing with light. And I think it's the truth that generally most of us, our first response is to light, and then we try to find a way to put something together based around that light. Or in my case, like with the plants, it's about finding the most opportune light for that plant. And sometimes it may be the absence of light altogether, just reflected shade or whatever that works the best for me. But yeah, I think all of us respond to light very similarly. And I think it's a human biological thing, right? Without it,
for sure. I do too. I think in
yeah.
some locations, though, I wrote something recently about how some locations light is more critical than in other locations, like the Palouse, like Death Valley, where there's not the obvious subject where you're just trying to find good light and all the attention's on the subject. Locations like Death Valley, it's about the light. It's
Yeah,
all
yeah,
about the light.
yeah. And that one you're mentioning, yeah, that is from Death Valley. And um, yeah, when I'm looking at the mirror image, I don't know which way to lean. And I have a whole series of sand dune images, which I've never published because, sand dunes have kind of become a bit cliche. But for me, my sand dunes are actually, they're nude photographs. They're not really sand dunes.
Hmm.
And so that's how I look. And so eventually these will be pushed into the world and I'll have a book of these and a portfolio. But that's what that is. And if you look at a lot of really good, well done black and white nude photography, it's very simple composition and it's the way that the light is wrapping around the subject. And it's very much like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
Yep.
we before we came on here, the three of us are talking about printing, and maybe this is a good way to get into this. So I looked at the PDF file, Michael, of your
Mhm.
of your of your images that are in the book.
Mhm.
And then last night I was sitting down listening to a Sibelius symphony of all things and reading your book. And I have to tell you, no disrespect to the PDF file,
Mhm.
but man, and I encourage, I mean, I love everybody and that I know to buy Michael's book. I really would, but I encourage you to just admire the difference that these images and all images really look like on paper, on good
Mhm.
paper
Yeah.
versus a monitor,
Yeah.
night
And
and day.
what we were talking about before we started recording, Jack, is all of us, our background was with negatives, and you had to make a print to have something to show or to even know what you had. And so printing, I remember when I started printing myself. I remember my first wide format printer. I bought into the format market when it first started happening, and back then you really had to figure things out. It was not truly plug and play like it is today, and papers weren't there and inks weren't there. But I wanted to take entire control of the process, and because I used to be unhappy with my own chromogenic lab prints. They never printed them. They could never match the way my transparencies looked or the way I wanted the negative to look. So I ended up taking printing under my own helm. And there's nothing, I say this to all people, especially those like when we do our printing workshop, there's nothing more amazing to go on a field shoot in the morning. I don't know if you guys have done this, but to do a shoot, to come home, to download that image, to edit it, and make at least a first proof, all in the course of the same day. And you can't do that unless you own your own printer, right? That's just an impossibility. And then when you work with the lab, there's going to be iterations because you want somebody else to translate your vision into the print. There's just nothing like having your own printer and holding something at the end of the day that you made earlier and saying, I made this. And it doesn't matter, whatever you're into, whether it's coffee or bread or food or prints, when you can say, man, this is incredible and I made it, that's a really beautiful thing. And printing is not purely a mechanical process. There's a lot of creativity involved in printing, and that's why people get lost for hours doing it, whether it's traditional darkroom or the digital darkroom.
And the art of
Yeah.
printing's going away in people's home
Yeah.
and studios now, correct?
It is. Yeah, it's really sad to see how many traditional darkrooms are giving all their gear away. In fact, I've had people come join me in Death Valley who stopped somewhere on the way to Death Valley to pick up darkroom equipment because it was being thrown out or purged. But
Mhm.
yeah, that's happening everywhere. And of course, most people are lab printing now, outsourcing their prints to labs. And there are lots of good labs. There's no doubt about it. And it takes the hassle away from you. You just get a print delivered to you. But really, if you're into the object, especially one that you make, there's really nothing better than having your own printer at home where you can immediately take photos from the card and pull
Well,
off a
it's
print a few
it's
hours
it, it-
later.
it's kind of, I think you touched on it, Michael. It's sort of the final step in the creative process
Yeah.
from conception and visualization of the image to capture to post processing to output.
Yeah.
And a print output is probably the purest form of output for our art. That's a
Yeah.
physical manifestation of the work that we've done, just like a sculptor or painter. And
Absolutely.
I think as artists, that's something that folks could and should subscribe to
Yeah.
is the finished print. And as you were talking, what sort of hit me was a lot of folks obsess over gear, like the cameras and filters and memory card, because that's, the whole industry is built around,
Yeah.
getting the finest gear. But then when you outsource your image to a third party printer that maybe doesn't do a great job, well,
Yeah.
you've kind of sacrificed all your hard sweat on the front end.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And
You
going
know,
back to Jack, sorry, Jack, to interrupt you,
okay.
but your point about viewing a physical print versus an electronic representation of it, having front light instead of backlight on it, it's like the old, yes, we're a little bit old, but holding an LP record,
Hmm.
some
Hmm.
physical piece of music.
Yep.
And it heightens the experience. If
Yeah.
you're an art viewer, looking at the
Yeah.
real physical piece, I think heightens
Yeah.
your enjoyment of that piece of art.
Yeah, and John, I'll take that to the next extent. So I won't mention the record, but I've got four versions of the same record that have been reissued in the last 3 years, all mastered by a different mastering engineer, which is the same as your print going to a lab and
Hmm.
some human is putting their influence on what your
Yeah.
file is going to look like. And
Yeah.
every one of these, they're all good, but they all sound different.
Interesting. Are they all vinyl, Jack?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow.
But
Wow.
a
Wow.
different mastering engineer put
Yeah.
his little influence on it. And when you send your images to a lab, you better be picky on who you use. And
Yeah.
I recommend people staying with, if they have a lab that's good, stay with one lab where they
Yeah.
get to
Yeah.
know you, and maybe you could call them and talk to them.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
of them will send you proofs before they do the final print. This is
Yeah.
all really important.
Yeah.
Michael, you,
Well,
you're
even
much more of
Michael,
a,
you mentioned it before, ICC profiles. Sometimes you can get print profiles from labs,
Yeah.
so you can soft proof at home.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, as an addendum to that, what I'll throw in is if any lab tells you to send them an sRGB file for printing, immediately depart and go find another lab.
Run.
That's beyond the scope of our conversation, but that's obviously shrinking the color space for output. And that's something you don't ever want to do. So if you work with a lab that asks for an sRGB file, to say thanks and go find another lab that will take your TIFF
Uh,
file in a full color spectrum.
just in
Yeah.
so
case somebody asks, Michael, you know about this much more than I do. And I don't know, but John, he might know. Pro photo, actually, is that pro, and I know this Adobe RGB or 1998, whatever you want to call it, but
Yeah.
that big, huge color space, is that actually taken grasp?
It may someday. So we talk about this in printing workshops. So what I advocate is if you have devices that will capture in a large color space like ProPhoto, then you should. There's no harm in having that color space. But of course, when you output, it's going to shrink, right, to whatever the output source is. But if you can collect that much data, then you should. Maybe someday we'll get devices, and our displays are a good example. I don't know how many years of transition it took, but many displays now are 100% or near 100% of the Adobe RGB color space. Some years back, that was far from the case. They were all a very limited color gamut of Adobe RGB, and now you can generally buy a full spectrum Adobe RGB monitor. Whether or not we will ever have printers that can do better than what we're currently doing, we don't know. But anytime you have the ability to capture larger data, if storage is not a problem for you and color spaces don't have any relativity to file size, really, you should get more. Collect all the data you can. You just won't be using it if you're outputting to a smaller space, but
John,
collect
how
as
many
much as you
times do
can.
we see on workshops, people have their cameras set up and making files that are shot in sRGB? in
Way
camera.
too often.
Yeah.
Way too
Yeah.
often.
Way too often.
Because well,
Yeah.
it's the default setting for most camera manufacturers.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
JPEG
Yep.
and sRGB, and
Yeah.
if you care
Yep.
about your photos, nope, you got to
Yep.
get off that quick.
Yep.
Michael,
Yep.
let me, even though this is not a gear, do you have a favorite paper you're working with right now?
Always Hahnemühle.
Okay.
They're my favorite papers. So this Denizens folio is being printed on William Turner, which is probably one of the warmer and most textured papers on the market. But I actually find, I don't know, as I go through my career, I'm wanting heavier weight, warmer, and more texture. And I just find it a really good complement to my photographs. Generally, if they're more pure landscape, then I maybe a smoother paper like Photo Rag or one of the others in the Hahnemühle line. But I generally print all matte cotton papers, a little bit of Baryta, but not too much. But almost anything from Hahnemühle. And I think Moab makes great papers too.
Mm-hmm.
Use a little bit of Moab papers, but I generally would adhere to a company like Hahnemühle who's been in the paper business for hundreds of years. It's a good idea. So yeah,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
think they make great paper. Yep.
yeah. Stick with the best.
Yep. Yep.
Oh, what was I going to ask you? Oh, I had another great question, and I just lost it. Just lost it. Oh, that's too bad.
That's why
Well,
I'm
we'll
jotting
throw it over
notes
to
more and
Jack.
more. Yeah. Can I add on something going back
Sure.
to the printing thing? Um, one place where printing is really paramount for me. So anybody who has practiced the zone system or worked with film and worked with the Ansel concept of visualization, where, I can see what the end print in my mind's eye, what the end print should look like relative to the scene in front of me. Um, so I very much, when I'm using film, I'm shooting zone system or my modification of the zone system. And I very much employ visualization because I've been printing and shooting my subject matter for so many years now. I literally know what I want the print to look like coming out the back end when I have my camera set up in the field. So I can see the whole process tied together from me standing in the field to me pulling the print off of the printer, and I know what I want it to look like. And so for me, part of my field decisions are based on what I want the end print to look like because I can visualize what that end print looks like. And granted, that takes a lot of training, right? That's not something you learn how to do overnight. You have to, and that's a two-part process that involves a lot of photography and a lot of printing. If you don't do a lot of printing, you don't know what you want the prints to look like.
Right.
But when I have this now, what I think is a fairly cohesive look for all this Denizens work, I almost always know what the print is going to look like when I'm standing there in the field with the subject. And I'm generally making a print that looks really close to what I conceived at that time.
Which is a great point, and I think it's also true. I think that's a great point for our listeners who, even if you don't print, having an idea of what the output is going to look like, should look like, can affect your field decisions. And so sort of that end-to-end visualization of how to capture this, what are the processing steps, or do I have processing challenges, and then how is this going to look in an output. I think those are all critical things for us to practice in the field. And to your point, Michael, it takes practice.
Yep.
It takes slowing down
That too.
Yep.
That too.
and deliberate. And there's a few people that I wish that I had video of how they go about their business in the field and how deliberate they are, and how they may be out for a full day and come home with 4 or 5 frames.
Yeah.
And Michael's one of them, and that's why his work is what it is. And there's a few more that, John, you and I know who they are, and that's the result. You can't do that when you come home with 2,000 frames in a weekend. You just can't do it.
No.
And truth be told, even though I love to print, I hate sitting at a computer. When I'm printing, I don't even think about that. But for all other purposes, which include editing, I have a limit to how much I can sit and do. Mostly because my back tells me you really shouldn't be doing this, but I just get bored. And so what I suggest to students is edit in your head. Because if you're just going to come home and hit a delete 75% of the time, why even collect those frames to begin with just to see what things will look like? Just edit it all in your head in the field. You come home with a limited number of frames. Your back end work is a lot easier. So that's what I do. I spend a lot of time editing in my head, and often I'll talk myself out of photographs for
Yeah,
that very
knowing
reason.
when
Yeah.
not to shoot is just as
Yeah.
important as knowing when to shoot.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Michael, do you have any, you mentioned print classes. Do you have any print classes that are scheduled in the near future?
Yeah, so Chuck Kimmerly and I are now doing twice annual printing workshops. We call it the artful process and print. It's not just black and white. We do both color and black and white. And I'm very deliberate about using that name, the artful process and print, because there's both art in the process and in the print. And that's what we try to espouse to our students. And I think the next one is, I think, in March. They are all listed on my website, but I think it's early March, and we definitely have space for people. Yeah, and we've
Where
done,
is that going to be?
Jack, Death Valley. I do.
Imagine that.
I,
Imagine that.
yeah, March 19. Oh, I'm sorry. Um, it's early March, March 10 through 14. Nope, I'm sorry. That's not it either. January 6 to 9. There you go.
Ah,
January 6 to 9, 2025.
I was looking back when I knew you were going to be here today. I went back in my Outlook uh, files and looked at my distribution lists. And man, I did a lot of Death Valley workshops, and I quit doing them about 2016 or 2017 because and I'm not saying this, Michael, because you're here. I just, Michael, just he's the king of Death Valley,
is
and
the
I
Sultan.
just couldn't do. I mean, there's, I know I'm good at some places that I'm good at, and I'm okay in Death Valley, but man, compared to what Michael does, man, I just couldn't deliver the product that he does down there, and I just, I
Well,
still
your listeners should know that I didn't run Jack off.
no, no, not at all.
No,
But
but by you not being
No.
there, now we can't hang out there, Jack.
and John has grown to really, really love photographing in the Palouse, and he's
Mm,
gotten really good
Yeah.
at it.
mm.
When we first started going out there, I mean, I remember the first time we went out there years and years ago. John was like, "Oh my God, what am I going to do here?" And Death Valley's the same way.
Yeah,
Back
yeah,
here.
It
yeah,
is so hard.
yeah,
It takes a
yeah,
day or two to get into the zone out there. No pun intended.
yeah.
It's a tough shoot, even for seasoned pros.
I've been asked by over the years by a lot of repeat students, so when are you going to go somewhere else? Because they really would like me to take them somewhere else. And I'm scheming to do something on Joshua Tree in 2025, but so far have not made much progress on it but yet. But the truth is about Death Valley. It's sort of my spiritual center away from this place I'm sitting in now. The park, I have a relationship with park staff. They make it very easy for photography groups to conduct business there. Stovepipe Wells Village is very supportive of our workshops. The park is incredibly diverse and large. I know it like the back of my hand. So all of
Yep.
those factors together make it for me the place that I just don't even want to leave. It's like, why would I go somewhere else? Because it's so easy to live my life here in Death Valley. And, photographers are attracted to the place. But, admittedly, people who have been there now 2 or 3 times with me, they're really eager to see what else I have up my sleeve. But I'm just really, I'm actually, I would take people more places if it weren't for the lodging and dining end of things. Most of what I do is living outside out of the back of my truck, so I can be anywhere. I don't need to be anywhere near cities, lodging, or food. And there are other places that I've tried to engage photographers in, but they don't have services. And so we just can't pull it off. In Death Valley, it's a really complete package,
Well, John
So,
called me about the Palouse a few weeks ago, and he goes, I don't think we have a problem, but a lot of people are going to think we have a problem next year because Steptoe Butte's going to be closed. What are we going to do for our workshop?" And we both came up with the same answer. Good.
what's the issue there with
Because
Steptoe Butte?
that's the Mesa Arch of the Palouse. That's the El
Oh,
Capitan of the Palouse.
oh,
And there's so many other places to go. Like you take people,
yeah,
places other than the icons.
yeah,
And
yeah.
we're going to go next June, and we actually can't wait because we've got a whole litany of places to
uh,
go. Like you go into Death Valley, we
yeah.
do the same thing in the Palouse. Yeah,
Yeah. I'm
yeah.
embarrassed to say I still have never been there. I love the photographs. I
Well,
love the way
you
it
should
looks, but
go.
I've
The
never
Palouse
seen
is
it with my
it's Death
eyes.
Valley with
Yeah.
green.
Yeah.
I'm telling you,
Yeah,
Yeah.
what it is.
it is.
Yeah.
It
It's what it
is.
looks like. Yeah. Yeah. Do you guys by chance remember Don Kirby's black and white work from the Palouse years and years
I
ago?
know the name.
No.
I'm
Yeah.
not. I don't
Yeah.
know him, but I've
I
seen.
forgot what he called that body of work, but it was the first work I ever saw from the Palouse, and it was all pure black and white.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
Death Valley with
Yeah.
green. That's what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Well,
Death Valley
folks,
with crops.
yeah, exactly. Well, Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think we're probably about time to wrap it up. And folks, please visit Michael's website and order up a hard copy of the Denizens book. You will not be disappointed. Is it
John, can we
also
do one
available
thing?
anywhere else other than your website?
It can be purchased electronic. There are links on my website. You can get
Okay.
electronic ebook from MagCloud. They'll
Okay.
provide it. Yeah, and there's a link
And Michael,
direct from my
just tell
website.
everybody what you've got going on that they may want to partake of.
Let's see. August 7th, I am speaking for nature photography workshops. If you guys are familiar with that, sorry, it's nature photography classes. Those are hosted by Nick Stover. So my session is August 7th. They're live Zoom sessions. And in this speaker series is Brooks Jensen of Lenswork, Weibo Hu, black and white photographer. It's an all black and white series. Um, Richard Martin, and myself. So we're the four presenters for this summer series. And I think each of these is a week apart, but my session's on August 7th. And then in November, I have a black and white workshop with Chuck in Death Valley, Chuck Kimmerly. We have one seat left in that. I have Death Valley workshop in December with the Los Angeles Center of Photography, then printing workshop with Chuck in Death Valley in January. I could keep going, but we don't need to do that. It's all listed on my website, and I would love to work with anybody.
With additional
Yeah.
great photographs.
With great photographs. Yep.
Yes. Well, Michael, thank you for being here.
But thank you
It's been
guys.
too
Thank
long,
you,
and
Jack
John
and
and I
John.
were
Yeah.
talking with Guy and Colleen on the last podcast. Maybe in a few months, if John and I we'd have you guys back next week, but
I'd love to.
but
Yeah.
if, in a few
Yeah.
months, John, let's get the
Yeah.
three of them together. Man,
And
what a
John,
blast that'd be.
I told Jack, I don't know if he related to you, but I have not. I didn't realize you guys were up to 125 recordings now. Congratulations, that's
Yeah,
quite
thank you.
awesome. I've only listened to a fraction of them, but the minute Colleen posted or Guy posted about the We Talk with them, I listened, and I think it was probably, I don't know what you guys say, but I haven't heard all of them, but I think it probably had to be one of the best
That
conversations I've
was
heard.
for sure one of
Yeah.
the best.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
was a really good conversation. And I
Yeah.
concluded Colleen's book a few days ago, and it's a really great book.
It is.
It
And
is. It is.
Colleen's a really great. Hey, we're all lucky to know each other. These are all good people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Let's keep some of the stories though between us.
yeah.
Plenty
Oh,
of
well, yeah.
thank you for being here, Michael. It's always
Thank you.
a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Yeah, thank
John,
you, Jack and John.
thank you for John's the technical guru here. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, John, for doing this.
Thank you,
Um,
Don.
and again, if you have any questions, comments, it's wetalkphoto@gmail.com. We're happy to hear input. If there's anybody that you'd like to see us try to get a hold of to get on here, we'll do our best. Just send us a note. And until next time, any old business, new business, John? Am I leaving anything out?
No, I think we're good. I think we're great.
Okay, folks. Well, thank you for being here, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.